So, good afternoon and welcome everybody to the latest episode of the New Normal webinar series. Episode, I think it's number 45, this one. We're getting closer and closer to a year. Today we're focusing on the middle mile with some great guests. I use the plural, so we're going to have some great conversations. We're going to focus on the middle mile. To anybody who is new to joining the webinar series, welcome, and hope you enjoy it and hope it becomes a new steady booking for your Wednesday lunchtimes or afterwards watching the recording. For anybody that's been here regularly or before, thanks very much for coming back. It mustn't have been that bad. And hopefully you enjoy our discussions and you can offer your opinions as well. As always, there is a chat box on the screen in your menu bar. Please use that. Please interact. Feel free to offer your opinions, questions for the panel, and we will weave it into the conversation and we will do the best we can and get it answered and make sure that you get the right answer to your question. And if you don't get the right answer, keep banging on so that we can respond. Right, moving on to the second page. And normally this would be done by my co-pilot, Shahid, but he is clearly old enough to get the vaccine for COVID. So he's had that and it's knocked him a little bit squiffy. So get well soon, mate, and back on next week. And we look forward to you being an audience member this week and listening to how it's going when you listen to the recording. So the agenda, as always, I'll walk through it. So first of all, very briefly, who are we? What's this about? This is all about back when first lockdown started, and I still can't believe we talk about first lockdown, second lockdown, third. First lockdown started, we thought we'd do something a bit more interesting than just loads of Zoom meetings and team meetings. We'd try and use our LinkedIn connections to learn some new stuff. And that's what we've done. And we've got a great set of topics, great set of recordings. If you haven't seen them all, please go back and have a look. So what are we going to be talking about this week, this and future weeks? We're going to be talking about things that are just interesting stuff. And the whole goal of the set of topics and the whole series is that it's basically a bunch of people having a chat in a bar about a topic that's pretty interesting, and other people can join in. And at the end of it, we go out and then everybody that's listened can go to their mates in their bar and say, you'll never guess what I learned this dinner time or lunchtime if you're poshing from the south. And and that's the whole point. It's just to learn something interesting that you can either take away and use in your work, baffle your family, baffle the facts, whatever, but just it's just something interesting. And today's topic is one of those that I'm really interested in, and got a regular guest or regular attendee. Mike Mccloy has volunteered to come and talk with his colleagues from his business Bricks, and to talk about the middle mile. We've talked about the last mile a few times, but this is the interesting one. Let's talk about the middle mile, where we can save loads of money, save loads of costs, and we can be absolutely dazzled by the knowledge of Mike, Ram, and Paul. So that'd be really good. We then have the usual discussion and questions. We've got a space for that if you want to, but we encourage the interaction. It will be good, it will be flowing, and it will be you get the answers on the spot, which is always good. We finish with the resource page walkthrough, as always, which, as Shahid always says, is our commitment to you to give you something for nothing and be able to use some facts, presentations, quotes, columns, bring them all together, things that's relevant to the subject we've had. And then we do a preview of next week's webinar, which I'll do Shahid's words, which is to tantalize for you to come back next week. So I've at least used some of his words anyway. So then it passes back to me to talk about put a bit of context on the subject for this week. And I found this great infographic, this great slide. It was wonderful. I was doing some searching, and I was thinking about the middle mile and what does that mean? And the middle mile, the guys will describe it. But then I started thinking about, well, what about the whole journey and how far do packages travel in miles from an order? And we look at an online order here in this case, and I found this great graph. Yeah, it's January, it's into middle of 2018, but I think it's just indicative of how things can change depending upon where you locate your inventory. And this used Walmart and Target over in the US, and it was all about delivery to the end customer, so not click and collect. But and just for scales, Walmart was about 50% click and collect, whereas Target was 35%. But this was how Target then leveraged local inventory in the store to then deliver out to their customers. And it was the start of thinking about how we can position inventory in the right place. And if we position inventory in the right place, then it travels less miles. If it travels less miles, then the cost's less. The environment gets better protected because we're not putting all those fumes in. We're not traveling on the roads. We're not, whatever we're doing. And the phenomenal number was the miles, the package transit miles that were saved in April 2018 alone, which was nearly 4 billion miles, which, here's your stat for the day. They saved 8,400 trips to the moon and back, or even 160,000 trips around the globe. So huge amounts of savings in distance, and what that relates to in carbon, in emissions, what it relates to in terms of everything in the environment and the costs is got to be huge, and it's going to have only got better since then. So I thought that really contextualizes the opportunity with saving the amount of distance traveled for each of those little smiley parcels that you get delivered to your house. So that gives us an idea of the sort of area we're going to be talking about. So now I'll just, as is tradition, walk through the 5 points that we're going to talk through today. So we're talking from a view of consumer behavior, how that's changing, how the desires, the needs of the consumers changing, how therefore the supply chain's evolving, the effects of the pandemic and what that did, talk about some real world examples. The guys are going to talk about what they're working on. And it's great because we've actually got a perspective from Mike, who's in Liverpool, which is almost the UK. And then we have Ram over in the US, who is just got up, basically, as it's 7:30 their time. But we're going to get perspectives from the US and Europe, which I think puts two really interesting lenses on it as well. So first of all, I'll ask our team of guests to introduce themselves, and I'll ask you to lead off, Mike, seeing as you're more familiar with this format. And off you go.
Of course. Thanks, Steve. Second time caller, long time listener. Good to be back. So I'm Mike Mccloy, Director of Operations for Brick Supply Chain UK. And my background ostensibly is systems and robotics and automation implementations, but I've been kind of brought into the last mile discussion through my work with bricks and all of the development that's happened in the area of micro fulfillment. And so that was kind of the window into the middle mile, but some of the work bricks has done has kind of opened up this whole new word for me about the middle mile and the effect it has on our supply chains.
Brilliant. Ram, let you introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Ram Gopalakrishnan. I'm the founder and CEO of Bricks. At Bricks, we help a lot of retailers with strategy, process, and technology enablement. And as part of our evolution, we have created technology for the middle mile to help predictively place products inventory closer to the end consumer. And we are focused on solving the middle mile so we can make the middle mile green and cost effective.
Like it, succinct, good mission as well. So purpose as well as profit, which is brilliant.
Thanks.
Is the way of the world. And thirdly, not last by any means.
Myself. All right. Good morning. So my name is, I go by PJ, but my real name is Paul, but stands for Paul Jr. But anyway, I've been working the last decade primarily in retail and e-commerce distribution. Started with just doing the actual software system and the WMS itself. And then slowly but surely worked my way up to higher and higher level throughout the higher supply chain, but always core focus was usually retail. and e-commerce. And I now work for Ram at Bricks as a more strategy level. I've done a lot of technology selection, whether it's automation or warehouse management type technology, but am now the product manager for that technology that Ram was talking about that helps with the predictive inventory positioning specifically to get lead times down for retail and e-commerce.
Cool. Brilliant. So we cover everything from strategy down to execution. So I'm just going to be able to sit back and listen to you three talk. It's great. Obviously, my background in it is as well in all this area. I have been a supply chain director and I have run several warehouses. So I've got a personal experience view and the real people view of it as well. So interesting. So let's look at the first interesting headline that we picked out. So consumer behavior. You guys highlighted and you wanted to sort of lead in with the changes in consumer behavior that we focused on quite a few weeks here on this this webinar and the discussion. But so what are you seeing about the changes in consumer behavior out there, guys?
Yes, so I will speak to this, Steve. First and foremost, a lot of times, people say that necessity is the mother of all invention. And I think one of the key reasons there is significant focus on the middle mile is all pointing back to the new age consumer, right? And traditionally, like, pre-e-commerce, when consumers wanted something, they would go to a physical store in their neighborhood. And that store would have an assortment of products based on past history of what people are buying in that vicinity. And they would buy product, be happy, and that was the limit of exposure of the consumer behavior, which is basically behavior of how people shop in stores.
Yeah.
And as e-commerce evolved, there was a lot of changes to the consumer behavior. Essentially, people used to, do a hybrid in terms of how they buy. In instances, it made sense for them to go buy things at the store. I have personally experienced so many instances where consumers would go to a physical store to touch and feel product, but then they will buy the same product elsewhere because of price effectiveness.
I'll give you a great example of that. Example of that one. So a few years ago, I was working with Best Buy over in Minneapolis. That I'm sure you guys know well. Few people know them over here because we came in briefly and then left. But so I was working with Best Buy, and one of the propositions that Best Buy always said was they had live devices in store. So your computers that you had, your laptops and all that were always live. So you could go out to the internet, you could use the Wi-Fi, you could use whatever. And so we did a check at one stage where we looked at the most frequently used pages on those machines that were in Best Buy. And it was Mall of Americas in Minneapolis, where we used as the basis. And so the most common, the most frequently accessed page was the Best Buy homepage, which it would be because every time it goes back to it. Second most used page was the Amazon checkout page. People were coming into the store and it was classical showrooming. They were in there and let's see what it's like. Let's find out. Let's get the information from the blue shirts, the people that were the service assistants, and then let's buy it cheaper online. So exactly what you said.
Yeah. So with that, that evolution, kind of led to also the next step in the process. So in addition to kind of pricing, e-commerce, when a lot of providers that do digital native e-commerce type services, they also started providing very competitive service levels. Like if I wanted something like, in the past, I had the ability to go to a store, buy what I wanted and come back. So it's a probably, same day turnaround for the most part. Whereas if I buy something online, as a consumer. The default expectation, 10, 15 years back was I'll get the product delivered 5 to 7 days from the time I place an order. And people were used to that expectation. And as part of that process, it allowed for people to, plan ahead, if you will, before, purchasing something.
Yeah.
If I have my dad's birthday like 2 weeks out, I know I have to place my order now in order to get it on time, right? And as part of, some of the effect of Amazon Prime 2-day and Prime 1-day, particularly if you look at the case of Amazon, they have 300 plus distribution centers around the country. And, in 2004, they started offering Prime 2-day. And it took them 15 more years to offer Prime 1-day. But once, you set up certain expectations with consumers, it is hard to kind of go back and take away some of those expectations. And that's where, the aspect of service level also became a big focus. So today's consumers are looking for the products that they want to be fast, free, and convenient. Convenience in the form of being able to ship or order from where they are.
Yes.
Right. And getting it fast, like I'm not going to plan 2 weeks ahead to get what I want. I'm going to place an order today. I want it tomorrow. Yeah. If you don't have the blue shirt that I'm looking for, it's okay. I'm going to find it elsewhere where I can get it in a couple of days or even tomorrow. Right.
No, I think that's really true. I think that's really true. And I think what's the expectation in the US? Is it next day? Very much next day now.
Yeah, it depends on like the product category, but for the most part, if it's grocery, it's mostly the same day.
Yeah.
If it's apparel or luxury, if it's like 1 day or 2 days, right? If it's furniture, then it's a longer lead time.
Yeah,
but in general, yeah, I think like Prime 1-day or same day is now the bar. That's what the retailers are working towards.
And that's interesting because then it's long been the case within retail for as long as I've worked in it, which is a long time. There was always a trade-off. There was always that classical trade-off. Do we have customer service or do we have efficiency of stock? And it was always been that trade-off. So do I fill my warehouses so I can make sure everybody gets what they want tomorrow, or do I actually manage my working capital and manage my flow so that actually, I carry the minimum stock possible? And that's always been that sort of dilemma. And, now we're seeing the size of some of these warehouses and DCs that, Mike, you've been seeing in the UK that Amazon are building now with, they're about 3 around Durham alone when you see the size of them and you think, my word.
Well, there's no doubt, Steve, is it, that we went down that road quite a long way on the warehouse efficiency road, going for scale, going for volume. And, as we'll come on to, the pandemic and things like that has kind of tripped us up a little bit with the effectiveness and flexibility of those networks. So there's quite a few people literally caught a cold from those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great you highlight, because service level then becomes a differentiator. And I know the likes of, we're all now happily paying a bit of a subscription for a service level from many different retailers. So I know I'm probably paying for one, obviously Amazon Prime, because you get a lot with it. I think most people seem to pay that almost by default. Then you get the others with some of your other digital native type retailers who will put, if you pay me £20 a year, or let's be international, $20 a year and then you can get next day delivery, which is quite a smart model because it actually builds them quite a little bit of capital up to do it, and then they effectively manage their networks. So I think that's a real interesting change. And so, do you think that helps to buy? Does that build up the capital to then help them build up their infrastructure for their network, or do you think it's just to buy in another revenue line?
I mean, in my mind, it is probably to acquire and hold on to a customer.
Mm.
Because if I subscribe to somebody's services like that, very likely, I mean, I'm inclined to, I already have this capability with a certain provider. I'm probably going to come back and buy from that provider because I already have that service level. So that's part of the aspiration for a lot of the retailers that provide that kind of service.
Yeah.
And part two, is definitely the aspect of being able to cover for some of the cost offset. In a lot of cases, we have seen retailers have a separate line item as a cost line item to expedite services for loyal customers.
Yeah. Just as a question, anybody out there that's listening, if you knock into the chat, if you actually subscribe to Amazon Prime would be interesting, just with a yes, Amazon Prime, or also if you pay for subscriptions to anything else would be quite useful. I'd be interested to find out. And
half of us probably don't even know, Steve.
That's true.
I know for a long time I had Amazon Prime on I didn't even know what it was. It was coming through and I was like, oh, what's this?
Yeah.
It's selected it by accident. So
I just got it for the football. But so that's really, that's really good. So to match that, lovely onto the second point. So how's the supply chain evolving, guys? How are we seeing that change?
Well, I mean, I think we've said before in previous conversations, Steve, the supply chain is evolving, and it's evolving quicker than it probably ever has. So, as I said, I was kind of introduced to middle mile through micro fulfillment centers and the ideas of people building smaller warehouses close to urban areas, automating those warehouses to deal with demand in a certain way. But it's not just the retailers. We tend to talk a lot about the retailers and their challenges, but even what we call first mile participants. So in other words, from the actual manufacturer or supplier to the network, the CPG, FMCG crowd, they're finding changes in their supply chains as well. A lot more of their business is coming direct to consumer, and they're having to flex in order to deal with these challenges. And as we know, supply chain really goes backwards. So the changes that we've seen recently in those areas are unlikely to be reversed.
Yeah.
So who could predict that we would have demographics on the cards like home worker and home learner, home connectivity, shielding, at-risk groups? Who would have suggested that these would be a big part of our businesses now?
I think you're right. And I think we saw, obviously the pandemic, we'll come on to that, and the pandemic and how it changed things, but it also, the whole sourcing model got really exposed during the pandemic, particularly when China first got impacted. And we're still seeing that in availability of products anyway. And this is from manufacture as well. I tried to buy, my daughter started university in September, and we were trying to get her a printer for her room. And it was like we were searching for hen's teeth. It was just so rare. Lots of them there, and just nobody had them. Then we can go on to the customer service aspect when I see something on a shelf and I say, I'll take that one then. And people and the stores won't sell you it. And that sort of, I think the phrase has got my goat quite a bit. Like, well, sell me the display model. It's great. I just want it.
But it's not just inventory, is it, Steve? I mean, the thing is, there was the toilet paper debacle and printers and all these things. But we're talking about also human resources, people available to deliver for the last mile, space, warehouse space. Rental of warehouse spaces, as we're in the UK, and Ram can attest in the US as well. We're seeing record numbers of warehouses being built, taken on, and rented. You know, the business is changing in logistics, whereby there's a lot more small rentals of warehouses close to urban areas taking place. You know, not just the 3PLs, but companies who deal with smaller space sizes that can be utilized by independent retailers and things like that. So it's kind of a triple whammy as to what we've seen.
Yeah, well, I think the last mile we've seen, so use the last mile that we covered a few weeks ago, but we're seeing a total industry there that sort of grew up over the pandemic in many ways. It was always there. We always had our home delivery. We had the White Arrow van that used to come around when my mum had a catalogue years ago that used to deliver stuff. But the home delivery side, you know, when we think the one that started it off probably became prominent at home was Next when they did their home deliveries in the UK here. Then, you know, everybody developed. So then we see the likes of a Hermes grow and develop and become a big operation. We see the start of the gig economy with all of these things. We then see when we had Tom from Bring the other week, and they link in with Deliveroo and Uber to do the last mile stuff. And I think, wow, that's like really fascinating. But then you start to think, well, that's great, and probably this is how we then get to the subject of today. That's the end. But then there's all the stuff of getting it from manufacturer, CPG company to the point where it can be distributed. And I guess this is where, you know, your definition of the middle mile. So probably worth if you could just define the middle mile for people, for anybody that might not be familiar with it.
Well, actually, the middle mile came. The term came about actually through broadband and the kind of management of broadband rates. But in logistics, it's the fulfillment that takes place between the network to the customer. So we've got the last mile, which actually deals with that last mile from the customer to the home. But there's a whole level of fulfillment, which includes micro fulfillment centers, which includes pop-up shops, which includes wherever you're selling, buying, picking up, dropping off, dark stores. There's a whole layer of experiences there which which have grown up and need to be taken care of. And there's two elements to it, because what we're finding is that organizations are moving into this area of the middle mile kind of unprepared. They're being forced into it by elements such as the pandemic, and they're dealing with it in traditional ways, manual ways. And what we're trying to do at Bricks is trying to bring a bit of order to that area by putting the focus on logistics,
right,
and the costs of logistics within that area. There's been a lot of attention on, you know, the customer-centric side of things. It's kind of been taught. You had a podcast on it last week. You know, personalization, service levels. We all know that every single organization that's around today needs to think about where their customer wants, how they want to be serviced.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to it, when it comes down to logistics and supply chain, it needs to be bedded in efficiency, and it's going to come back to that way. So at some point, we've got to start looking at how those costs are managed, how we can show them to the decision makers involved, and how they can control that area as well as just responding to the demands of the market.
Yeah.
And in simple terms, Mike, would you say like it's the set of miles where the retailer has control of the inventory and the ability to place where they want to stage it in anticipation of a sale?
Yeah, effectively, that's the difference between the middle mile and the last mile. Yes, right.
So you got the interesting interface, really, don't you? Because you've got to pick it up, or there's that point where it ships from the supplier, and then to the point where you get it to where you want to make the sale. And that is evolving one hell of a lot. And we saw that example, you know, the very simple example of getting it into their stores in my context slide, and the amount of mileage you can save, and we all joke about how far a parcel travels from the time somebody orders it, or even the time of shipping it. It becomes ridiculous number of miles. But because I think we're seeing, and you've used the term quite a couple of times there, Mike, since we started, around the micro fulfillment center. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, micro fulfillment center is something that is, it involves small scale warehouses placed in accessible locations closer to the end consumer, and it has the potential to be very disruptive in the supply chain industry, and there's a lot of technologies and companies looking into it at the moment. Takeoff Technologies is probably one we've heard of. It actually uses quite traditional automation processes in small warehouses for grocery, and enables them to be used almost in a mixed use fashion in a retail area and a logistics area closer to the customer. And there's plenty of examples popping out. There's a lot of people dipping their toe in the water. AutoStore, the automation solution we talked about on the podcast earlier, Steve, is another one. Nike have set up kind of pilot projects in areas with multi-use retail areas with storage at the back of the store, which enable them to store a higher amount of SKUs in that particular storage area, while servicing a retail element as well. And that's kind of broadening out into the areas we talk about contactless shopping. So some of these MFCs are geared towards the end-to-end process being completely automated or robotic. So the storage is robotic, the picking's robotic, and it almost becomes like a large vending machine rather than a warehouse or a retail store, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And combine that with the point you said earlier about how you're seeing more, both you and Ram are seeing more and more warehouses being built, and commercial property like that being built. So we're seeing an increase in that type of commercial property. We're also seeing through the likes of Arcadia going pop, and various others that are on the retail parks going pop. There's going to be a glut and an excess of property available on some of these retail parks. We could see some of them maybe turned into micro fulfillment centers, because they tend to be outside of the main shopping areas, main towns, so a bit more traffic free and a bit more accessible. Perhaps you could see that developing.
Absolutely. And I think operations wise, there's a lot of the big retailers are already thinking that way. They're already putting in place the operations to enable this with their current retail environment. So they're taking it on board. But at the moment, a lot of them are just trying to do it from a manual point of view and putting traditional storage in there and work it out. The technology, and this is interesting because even before the pandemic, some retailers were already looking at distributing the networks and going a lot broader in their approach of getting close to the customer. They were already creating these MFCs, so to speak. But the concept then wasn't so much to be mixed use in retail environments. And so the technology solutions out there at the moment aren't quite fit to that world. And this is why people are having to flex and solutionize all the time in different ways. So it's not just about automation and robotics. It's about managing the processes they're putting into their mixed use retail environments.
I want to stick something and hold this thought in your mind, because Farsad raises a good point in the chat about returns being a good issue, being a big issue. So we'll talk through all of the positive sort of logistics, but then there'll be the reverse side as well. So I think we'll pick that up shortly to look into returns, because I've got loads of questions about returns as well in this sort of environment. But I'm intrigued. So talk us through. So what's the technology solution that you guys has come up with?
you want to take that, Ram?
Sure. Sorry. Steve, what we have is a modular solution that accounts for 3 different focus areas.
Mhm.
First is a solution that helps retailers establish and execute on urban fulfillment or market distribution. It is for dynamic and agile distribution networks. So that's part 1, which is essentially if you are a retailer that is looking for answers on, hey, Ram, like I have a network that I set up, that worked exceptionally well to replenish store locations, right? But on, year over year, quarter over quarter, my store sales are decreasing. My e-commerce is increasing, but it's still not increasing enough to offset some of the lost sales. So a lot of that is because I'm not able to cater to the service levels that the new age customer is expecting. So now help me understand how my network needs to look like in order for me to be successful in an environment like that. So basically we come in, understand the different nodes, right? Whether it is a distribution center, regional distribution center, stores, back rooms, third-party locations, potential shared distribution. We look at all of the above to establish an agile distribution strategy that will help them execute well, not only once, but on a more continuous basis. Our technology is machine learning based, so it's not like I come and set you up for the next 5 years, because that's not how e-commerce operates. Consumer behavior changes on a daily, weekly basis, and our solution continuously learns from what is happening in the real world to establish an agile distribution strategy for the retailer using their own assets, real estate, and capabilities. And the second part is intelligent inventory placement. It's basically around how you can position product closer to the end consumer for an effective last mile as a retailer, right? So we have retail customers that make a lot of product in Asia and South America, and a lot of that is for price effectiveness. I mean, that creates the first mile. But let's say somebody like that brings like 10 trailer loads of product into like a port in Savannah or Los Angeles, right? And the retailer has like in the past, the concept of distribution was, let's just establish a large 1 million square foot distribution center in the middle of the country, Indiana or Ohio. And with that, I will have access to, the end consumers in 5 to 7 day time. But the consumer expectations have changed now. So there are situations where our retailers bring product from Asia, like, and then using a transload facility, they ship it all the way to, say, Atlanta, where they have distribution. And then they ship it, back to end consumers in Los Angeles for same day, next day type services, right? So our approach to inventory placement is taking a lot of consumer behavior information, whether it is Steve likes to buy products curbside, Mike likes it delivered next day, right? Ram buys 3 of the same and returns 2. We take a lot of that consumer behavior information and analyze that with sales forecast, seasonality, and weather, any number of social parameters in order to establish predictive and intelligent placement outcomes. That way, like what you traditionally, if you brought 1,000 units of a blue Polo and placed it in Indiana, that may not necessarily be the best strategy for you. Maybe you have to decentralize some of that and place it in 17 different areas for the most optimal, sales, most optimal last mile. And that's the second part of our solution. And the third part of our solution is like a what if modeling simulator, we anticipate, people like a chief supply chain officer, or I even tell people that in the future, there's going to be a new type of CIO, a chief inventory officer, right? That will continuously look at where, every day, every week actions of inventory placement is going to determine both your top line and bottom line. So continuously understanding the impact of your decisions. Hey, I have a couple of options. I bring product all the way to Indiana, or maybe I leverage my third-party partner to do this particular strategy. And a lot of this boils down to, the end consumer, their preference in terms of service levels, the quantities, and, what your goals are. In instances, we are working with retailers that have $120 jeans, which they want to improve on their full price sell-through. Hey, today I end up discounting, about 40% of them at 80%, and I want to improve on that metric, right? Or in another instance, today I am, creating a lot of split shipments, and I want to consolidate and provide more streamlined shipments to my end consumer, right? So a lot of retailers have different types of goals and metrics. And as part of the process, so with the simulation, we help them understand a lot of the impact of their decision making and make data-driven decisions. And with the agile distribution setup, we help them execute on how they need to be set up for the modern work. And with the intelligent placement, we enable that execution and enable more cost-effective last mile options. And with that, I'll pass it on to PJ. He can probably add a little more color to the execution.
Sure. Yeah. So just basically to kind of take all that together, what we really do is we take a retailer and their assortment plan, or we take their purchase orders they've already placed as they're coming into the network, right? A lot of times the way that it works is product comes from overseas, and the United States will go into a transload facility before it gets distributed across retailers or throughout their network. So essentially we work with that as the input, and then we're sort of the connection between the merchandise planning, the allocation replenishment systems, which they still, will still use today. We're not trying to rip and replace, but we add this additional layer of intelligence from the modern consumer that includes not just in store, but online, and how demand is more fluid now. It can shift between all those channels. Right now we see with a lot of retailers, they forecast just to the location and based on sales history. And they do that for every channel individually, and it misses some insight in between, some efficiencies that can be gained as far as, how can you efficiently actually position inventory for all those channels, but not overcount demand, put too much safety stock to try to cover all these channels, which creates waste, or be, on the other hand of the equation, of course, be understocked and not be able to meet the customer when they expected it next day or curbside and the inventory wasn't there. So we pull that data from order history, pull that data from external trends, like Ron mentioned, like seasonality and things like that. We will also pull it from data from the transportation system to understand, what the actual implications on the transportation side are, both whether you're putting it into a warehouse or whether you're putting it into a store, and whether you're fulfilling the order, the last mile from that store from a warehouse, comparing all of that, understanding the trade-offs, so that ultimately a retailer can make the decision of how much additional inventory maybe to put within a market, say Atlanta, the United States, that not just for stores, but for online too, but also for stores, it can be serviced for everybody and everything. And it's just a fluid pool of inventory that can be used as sort of a hub model, right? That can be used for those stores, can be used for any kind of online delivery within that market. So you gain efficiencies by pulling that inventory like that and reducing the overall inventory overhead, but at the same time, increasing your ability to serve customers in that market by positioning the inventory in that market, as opposed to 7 days away in a regional DC.
Yeah, it's interesting. That what I find fascinating. So I'm working with a number of retailers at the minute, and some of the big issues are inventory accuracy, first of all. So regardless of how clever any predictive model is, some of them just need to get their data right. And I think you highlighted that right at the off, all of you, because it's my big passion about AI and stuff. If you it's the old garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
You can have AI making the best decisions in the world, but if you feed it the wrong information, it's going to make the wrong ones.
Yeah. But it fills the gaps as well, though, Steve. That's the beauty of the ML.
Right.
So the idea is that in addition, you're bringing a whole host of data in feeds in, and sometimes there are going to be gaps in that framework. And so as well, you've got to find ways in which you can fill in those gaps, and AI and ML can do that.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've got on one client is, well, a couple, actually, not just one, is where obviously click and collect is becoming a big thing. And, but also people are click and collect and they're servicing it from stores rather than sending it from the center. And you've got to work out, so like, well, it shows available at the time when I'm going to do it, but what about if a shopper comes in and picks that off the shelf? And how do we manage all of those? And I think there's a whole load of intelligence that will grow around all of those areas to prevent Mrs. Miggins coming into the store thinking she's got to click and collect and then finding that it's not actually there anymore, which would be the worst of all worlds. And
which is the same kind of problems they're going to look at from the MFC point of view. So, it's just one of the facts of life is that if you've got a smaller warehouse space, yes, you'll be able to carry more SKUs than a retail store maybe, but there's still going to be a restricted number of those SKUs. So you still have challenges to. Are you taking in market intelligence as well? So some of these other intelligence data flows that's available out there. Or is that a next phase, or is that whatever? Because I'm finding when I'm talking to, let's say the likes of Google and people like that who are being able to drive the intelligence from intelligent search, location data from maps, all of that stuff, that starts to give some really useful feed-ins for some of these areas, because you can tell the footfall densities, all of that stuff.
We actually do take into account some. We actually do take into account some online indicators like that, and our roadmap is to continue to look as much externally as well as internally, because that's usually the big picture that's missing. And a lot of retailers in their forecasting today is they're missing the external picture. And especially when the pandemic happened, external factors are some of the most extreme factors that can affect your demand. So it's all about trying to incorporate those so that you can better position inventory to, in case one of those factors happens, again, be able to satisfy customer demand as it shifts.
Yeah, and we had one of the more interesting. So our genius government came up with this tier system that we had towards the end of last year, and that played absolute havoc with all sorts of managing of inventory, because we were getting town centres shut down and told that they had to close within a day, and then you didn't know when they were going to open. So I spoke to several supply chain directors I know who were tearing their hair out and were going grayer than me at trying to work out what inventory they had and how they were going to end up with excess inventory rather than being unable to sell it through. I'm conscious of time, and as we're moving on, and it's a great conversation, but I'd just like to pick up just something that Farsad did mention about returns. So are there any implications of returns in this sort of new world of the middle mile and optimizing, and how do we manage that and bring stuff in?
I think returns is a beast all to itself, Steve, and everybody solves it in a variety of different ways. The majority of people, actually, well, not the majority, but a lot of people actually separate it completely from the supply chain. So there's a complete reverse logistics operation to be had. Some of the larger automation facilities I've dealt with do bring it in just to get that, to turn around that good stock as soon as possible and get it out again. And it is another problem, kind of like feeding in the returns inventory if you do have a separate facility completely. But I think that where returns comes in and where we've got to get cleverer on those operations is in the calculation of costs again. You know, and I think again, one of the areas where Amazon is either playing it very, very smart. They do seem to take a lot of decisions about whether they take returns or not. In some cases, they just say, keep hold of the item. It's not worth us bringing it back to distribution.
Yeah.
And obviously there've been some issues with that kind of policy in the past, but you know, it comes down to some of the technologies we can bring in, you know, stretching it out into the future, thing like blockchain, so that we could, you know, actually calculate accurately how much that returns value chain is either costing or making.
Yeah, it was a deliberate hospital pass, because I don't think there's no perfect science to any of this whole return, particularly as, you know, like Farsad said, like was mentioned before, you know, Ram mentioned about people that order 3 and return 2, whereas Farsad's daughter's ordering 5 and returning 4. But
well,
it's age old. It used to be with the catalogs years ago, and they were the first people that actually factored the quantities into their inventory calculation.
Well, it kind of it plays into this big discussion about circular supply chains and how we deal with those things, doesn't it? And I was shocked today to listen to the CEO of Anglo American saying about how his profits have increased hugely, and part of it was about all of the thought that was going into circular supply chains and the rising cost in commodities due to that. And I was thinking, that's not the way it's supposed to work, I'm pretty sure. You know?
I think this one part of, I was thinking, while I've been thinking of this middle mile stuff, there's a part that we could see that becomes even more popular or common. Common's possibly the thing. Town centres and city centres becoming traffic free. And, you know, so we've already seen, and I've had to live with this in the past, was where you get restrictions on times where you can go down certain shopping streets. I think we're going to see in certain cities now, we're going to see the restriction of traffic after 6 o'clock in the morning or something like that. We're going to have to start to get smart as well. And this falls into your, you know, the middle mile stuff as to certainly replenishing stores. How do we manage to, you know, think of that and have one central point outside the town, perhaps using an old retail park, that becomes the consolidation point. Are you seeing some of that or thinking of that?
Yeah, so I can take that, Steve. First, you know, I'll go back to your reference about returns. I mean, I think the aspect of returns, I mean, it's not going to just go away, right? It is part of doing business, and there's 2 parts to it. One part is the consumer behavior, right? Which is, hey, how do you motivate a consumer to do better in terms of being green and not, you know, buying so much and returning so much, right? And yeah, part of that could be more like, you know, award system, just like Delta Sky Miles or something like that, you know, no return miles or any number of, you know, types of, and then the part that is controllable for the retailer is how is the return processed, right? So does it now have to go all the way back from Seattle to Atlanta, right? But that part can be solved better by way of the same, you know, like agile distribution setup that we talked about, where we can make the determination of where some of that returns will go to, right? So and then the second question that you just posted with respect to, you know, town centers, yeah, we have seen quite a bit of that, particularly with customers in New York. So a lot of them actually have a specific strategy. A lot of them, you know, say build a distribution center in New Jersey, and they do a truckload of product into certain drop-off points. And from those drop-off points, they use a combination of, you know, hand carts or even messenger bikes in order to get product to the end consumer. So we have seen a lot of creative options for that. But to your point, I mean, that is something that, you know, people are going to be cognizant about, and, you know, adapting to an agile supply chain and creating an effective middle mile is going to be very critical to long-term success.
No, I think it's fascinating, and I'm
Well,
flicking. Go on, carry on.
It's really relevant, isn't it? Because, you know, during the pandemic, I know that bike and foot delivery became a big thing in London. You know, the inability to one, get traffic in and out of there, and also the ability of retailers, especially in London, to offer them services, you know, will no doubt kind of lead to thoughts about, okay, how do we work differently and where do we need to put our stuff?
Yeah, and we've proven we can do it in the UK, because I mean, yeah, I was helping to deal with some of the stuff when we had the Olympics in London, and when you had totally restrictions as to where you could move stuff, and we had to replenish stores, and it became quite a challenge. I think we've covered everything on that sheet, which is quite impressive, because it was quite a range. And I think as we've gone through, we've covered everything on there, and we've managing our time quite well. So that's been a great discussion. And I don't know if anybody has any other questions that they want that's burning at the minute, please fire it through. But otherwise, it's been quite interesting to get a view of both sides of the pond, as it were, and find that we've got similar issues. I mean, we didn't even get touched on Brexit and the impact that having to plan your middle mile around Europe to the UK and stuff like that, which is probably another one of these altogether. What I'm doing is I'm just waiting to see how that all lands and how we survive for a few months before we actually pick up on that one, because that's
absolutely. I mean, that's definitely a dust settling conversation, shall we say?
It is totally, because there's pluses and minuses where we're seeing local producers winning, and yeah, we'll cover that one another time. But in the absence of there not being any further questions coming in, I'll just move on quickly. It's unusual having to do all this myself this week. I'm missing my partner in crime here. Looking onto the resource sheet, which I will use the same words, which was our commitment from that we would do. We'd give you something to take away, and what's really good is that we get the knowledge from our collaborators, our experts has joined. So Ram and Mike have contributed and found, you know, lots of these resources for people to follow up with. So feel free to investigate a bit further. You will be getting this sent to you. The details of Ram and Mike are at the top. Right, so you can see their backgrounds, and through their LinkedIn connect to them and learn more about this wonderful world of the middle mile. We got some case studies on the left of the slide, and then lots of useful resources as well in the middle to click on as usual. Resources down the bottom, good thought leadership coming from Deloitte and the other secondary consultancies. Who are not as good as Deloitte, but I would say that. And then contact details for myself and Shahid. And then at the bottom left, we have our link to the next webinar, which should be quite fascinating, which we're going to look at 2020 through the lens of the supermarket. And I bet we hit some of these middle mile debates, discussions. We talked toilet paper, toilet rolls and pasta early in this one. I'm sure it'll come again next week. And yeah, so that's just been really, really good, and look forward to next week. So what I would like to do in closing, God, it's only me again. In closing, I would like to thank Mike, Ram and PJ for your time, your knowledge, your experience, your expertise, and it's been great. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and I've certainly got a couple of my you'll never guess what I've learned moments to talk about when the pubs do open again. But no, thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll have a similar one again.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
Yeah, and then thanks to close always. Thanks again to the team that helped me put this together, to Joanna, to Claire, to Lucas, and my colleague, who I hope to be back next week, Shahid. And have a great week, and look forward to seeing you all next week. So thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you then. Thank you. Bye-bye.